Last year, gold outperformed stock markets as its price began to rise while things like the dollar began to fall. What does that mean for America's economy? And have we all missed our chance to get in on the latest gold rush? To answer those questions, I'm delighted to be joined on Reality Check today by Peter Schiff, who's an American stockbroker, gold expert, and it's probably fair to say one of gold's biggest fans. Peter, thank you for joining Reality Check. Gold has been soaring recently, but it seems to be coming down a bit in price. So my question is, have I missed my chance to get in on the latest gold rush?
Oh, no. In fact, this recent decline in gold and particularly in silver, I think gives you an opportunity to buy if you had missed out so far. I think what's happening with gold and silver at the moment is they're getting caught up in margin call liquidation related to other assets, particularly in the crypto space, Bitcoin, Ethereum, crypto-related companies, and then to a lesser extent, some of the tech stocks, software, AI-related names that a lot of people held on margin. And I think there's just a lot of forced liquidation right now. And so that's creating a temporary suppression of prices that had moved up quite a bit in the prior week. So they were already elevated. And so they were vulnerable to sharp pullbacks in an environment like the one that we have right now.
If it's still the right time to be getting into gold, how far do you think it can really go? I mean, I saw one analyst say we could hit the 6,000 mark. I mean, where has gold got left to run?
Well, on the upside, there's no ceiling on the price of gold. I mean, gold's been rising. It was $20 an ounce a while ago. I mean, when the U.S. was established as a nation, that was the official price. And it stayed at that level until the 1930s. And then as late as 1970, the price was $35. So now we're, around 5,000. So that's a very significant increase. But really what's happened is gold hasn't changed. Gold is exactly the same as it was when it was $20. Sure. What's changed is the dollar. We don't have the same dollar today. It buys a lot less. And so you need $5,000 to buy the amount of gold that you used to be able to buy with just $20. Now, if the dollar could lose that much of its purchasing power, it could lose that much more. So you could start adding zeros to the price of gold to figure out where it's going to go. The question is, how long is it going to take to get there? Is it going to take gold 50 years to go from 5,000 to 20,000? Or could it do it in 5 years or less? We'll see. I mean, there's a good chance that it may do it relatively soon based on the financial position of the United States and how many dollars we're likely to create out of thin air over the next few years to finance exploding debt.
Well, we'll get into that in a moment, but we've answered the key question, which I think you're pretty unequivocal that you should still be buying gold. When you've been sort of an evangelist for gold for some time. How did you first get into it? Why did you decide to champion gold at the start?
Well, I mean, I've known about gold pretty much my whole life because my father, was very much an advocate of sound money and believed in gold. I didn't start really buying it as a professional for clients until the late 1990s. And I did that because I thought it was cheap, and it was. I mean, gold was under $300, silver was under $5. But I also understood the policy mistakes that the Alan Greenspan Federal Reserve was going to make and what the implications were for inflation and the economy. And so I knew that gold and silver prices would be going much higher. And I was absolutely right. And in fact, the mistakes that Alan Greenspan made were repeated under every Fed chair since, including the current chair. Yeah. And they'll be repeated by Kevin Walsh once he takes over. So all these policies are highly inflationary policies.
What are these mistakes? You're talking about quantitative easing, interest rate decisions?
Yeah, well, artificially low interest rates and, excess money printing. Whether you want to call it quantitative easing, the balance sheet has exploded. The Federal Reserve has enabled profligacy on the part of the federal government and Americans in general. Interest rates have been suppressed by the Fed. As a result, we don't save enough. We borrowed too much. We consume too much. We have this huge bubble economy. We have asset prices that are completely out of whack with their fundamental values. We just go from one, bubble to another, and we're headed for a massive economic collapse. We had some tremors when we had like the 2008 financial crisis, but that's nothing compared to what's ultimately going to happen. But the main architect for this disaster has been the Fed. They haven't acted by themselves. The government's been borrowing and spending all the money, but the Fed's been enabling it.
And do you see this as a problem that's worse in America? I mean, Britain has made similar decisions with money printing, for example.
Oh, no. It's not uniquely American. Politicians, governments have made this or similar mistakes in a lot of, Western countries. And, their people are paying the price. Mm-hmm. But America is unique in the degree to which we've done this. And that is because America was unique in having the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. So we had a lot more rope with which to hang ourselves with than other nations. Sure. And so our problems were able to go on a lot longer than they otherwise could have. And so they got much bigger.
Sure.
Absent the dollar status, this thing would have collapsed a long time ago from a much smaller scale. But so our economy is going to suffer disproportionate to a lot of other countries when this whole system implodes. When the dollar loses that reserve currency status, and now we're faced with the reality of the situation.
And how close do you think we are to that, or America is to that kind of crisis? Obviously we seem to be seeing the beginnings of it, but is it going to settle, or is this really, the beginning of freefall?
No, I think we're reasonably close. I think that's why you saw this big increase in the price of gold. You're having an exodus out of dollars, a loss of confidence in the U.S. government, and rightly so, based on a lot of things that are being said and done by the current administration that would cause that loss of confidence.
Yeah.
It should have happened on its own anyway, but we've certainly, given the world a kick in the ass to move away from this, in which, they should have done it anyway. But now, we've kind of really given them an excuse and a reason to not wait.
Mm-hmm. And how much do you think the administration is in control of events? Some people say that this is the whole strategy of some of the people behind President Trump. They say that they want to devalue the dollar. Do you think that's what's going on here, or is that just sort of trying to explain?
No, if you're being run out of town, get to the front of the parade and pretend that you're leading it. No, yes, they want a weaker dollar in a sense, because it reduces the real value of our debt. But if the dollar's weakening, it makes it more difficult for us to finance our debt.
Yeah.
People don't want to loan us money if we're going to pay them back in depreciated currency. So if the world believes the dollar is going to weaken, that means U.S. interest rates are going to rise. And that is really at odds with the goal of the administration to lower rates. And it's also going to push up domestic prices. Affordability is already a major concern.
Yeah.
And a weak dollar means prices go up. Mm-hmm. And so higher interest rates, higher consumer prices is not what the administration wants. So they don't want a weak dollar, but unfortunately, they're going to get a weak dollar, and the policies that they're pursuing will weaken the dollar.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about, you said there was no ceiling for gold. Is there a floor for the dollar? If we get to real crisis, how low can the dollar go?
No, the floor is zero, right? I guess it could be worthless. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, no.
But that's not
the
realistic,
dollar has already lost.
Right? The dollar is not going to go to zero.
Well, what's the Confederate dollar worth? It's not worth anything. Paper currencies have a history of going to zero. I mean, most paper currencies that have ever existed went to zero. So, yeah, I mean, that could happen, but it doesn't have to go to zero. The dollar has already lost 99% of its purchasing power since we created the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
So it could lose another 99%. I mean, things that used to cost $1, right? Maybe now they cost $50 to $100.
Yep.
So, the same thing could happen again. Maybe something that costs $100, will end up costing $10,000, right? The dollar's still not zero.
Yep.
But, it effectively loses most of its value. I mean, if you're a millionaire and the dollar doesn't go to zero, but, a cup of coffee is $1 million, you're not really a millionaire anymore.
Yeah, sure.
All you could do is buy yourself a cup of coffee.
And then what, if anything, should the Fed, should the administration, should Western nations in general be doing to avoid this?
Well, other Western nations don't want to avoid this. They want to embrace it.
Sure.
I mean, the best thing that can happen to the world is the dollar stops being the reserve currency, because maintaining that relationship has undermined the global economy. Yes, it's benefited America, but only at the expense of the rest of the world. So we live beyond our means, and that's made possible by the world living beneath its means. Yep. We consume more, and so everybody else consumes less. We borrow a lot more, and so everybody else has less investment capital. Because they save the money, but then they loan it to Americans. So the world could have an economic boom as America experiences a massive economic bust.
Yep. And of course, if that were to happen, one of the big beneficiaries, we're told, would be Russia, who seem to be benefiting from the gold price as well. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, I mean, it doesn't concern me. I mean, I don't look at Russia as a big military threat to the United States. I mean, I think the biggest threat to the United States is the United States government.
Sure.
I'm worried more about what our government's going to do, or what our government might do to me. I don't worry at all about what the Russian government's going to do to me. They don't care about me. Or the Chinese government. I'm worried about the U.S. government. I think most Americans should be, if they're not already, more worried about our government. I mean, our government has done all sorts of illegal things to me.
And then just for this final section, you said that paper currencies can and do go to zero. Some people think they have an answer to that, which is cryptocurrency. But for our viewers and listeners that are not familiar with your work, you're obviously not a fan. You've tweeted today about the US jobs figures not looking very good. The US labor market is extremely weak. And you've said, that's bad news for all the broke crypto investors who will soon be looking for jobs. What have you got against the crypto investors?
Well, I mean, I don't have anything against them. I'm just pointing out that a lot of people who have invested in crypto haven't worked. They've been living off their crypto because they've gone out and borrowed money against their Bitcoin or whatever they own, and they've been spending that money instead of getting a paycheck. Yeah. But what's going to happen as the price of Bitcoin crashes, the Bitcoin that they own is going to get sold out from under them to repay their loans, and they're not going to have the ability to borrow any more money. In fact, a lot of them, if they bought their Bitcoin a while ago, are going to have tax bills that they probably can't even afford to pay. So they're going to be broke.
Yep.
And, if you're broke, what do? You go look for a job, right? So right now, if they're not looking for a job because they were Bitcoin millionaires, they're not unemployed. But when they're broke, because they no longer have any Bitcoin, or they got to go get a job. But now they become part of the official labor force now that they're looking for work. So statistically, they would be part of the unemployment rate.
Sure. But and you think that Bitcoin is really going to keep collapsing? That you don't think Bitcoin will rebound in the way that you say gold will?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally Bitcoin has very little, if any, value. I think the whole thing is a giant speculative mania. Maybe the biggest speculative mania in financial history. And a lot of people got duped into it, and the promoters of the scheme were able to successfully recruit Wall Street, the financial media, elected officials to help promote the scam. But, all bubbles pop, just a question of when, right? How big? And look, is this going to be just another crash? I mean, Bitcoin is almost down 50% now from its peak. But, Bitcoin has had periods of time where it's dropped by more than that, and it has gone on to recover and made a new high.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is this going to be another one of those times, or is that over?
Mm.
I would say it's more likely over, and that the air is going to come out of the bubble completely this time. But we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll
and
see.
if I happened to be holding some Bitcoin, you would say the best thing to do would be buy gold, turn it into gold.
Yeah, I would get out of the Bitcoin and buy gold or silver. I mean, silver in particular has pulled back dramatically today. So, you could sell Bitcoin that's down and you could buy silver that's down, although silver is still way up from where it was a year ago. Bitcoin is way below where it was a year ago. But silver has a lot more upside than Bitcoin. So you can make back what you lost in Bitcoin in silver, as opposed to just staying in Bitcoin and losing even more.
Sure. Just finally, I just want to nail this point about crypto, because if we accept what you say about it being sort of a scam and valueless, you also make criticisms of Alan Greenspan, the Fed, and which are shared by the way, the first ever guest we had on Reality Check, which was the great Arthur Laffer, who made the point that basically inflation wasn't a problem until the Fed made it a problem. He was of the view that potentially cryptocurrencies could come along so that monetary policy is completely privatized by the market, and then inflation returns to not being a problem. Do you see any merit in that argument?
Well, I would much rather have the government completely out of the business of money. I think it should be the private sector that handles money. I think to the extent that the U.S. government needs money, they should collect it in taxes. They shouldn't be able to conjure it up out of thin air. But I think if the private sector were to, be back in charge, it wouldn't be Bitcoin or any of these tokens that would end up being money. It would be gold. It would be silver. That's what ends up as money. Now we could, utilize gold through blockchain. We could have tokens like, Tether Gold has a token that is backed by gold. The gold is vaulted in Switzerland, and there are others, and there are more coming. So that would work. We could tokenize gold and use that as money, as a medium of exchange, and it would work perfectly fine. And yes, you would have no inflation under that scenario. You would have constantly falling prices. You'd have money that can be saved as a store of value, money that can be loaned out and repaid. And you'd have a viable unit of account, medium of exchange, much better than what the governments are providing.
Sure. Peter Schiff, thank you for joining Reality Check.